Hello and welcome to part 2 of our guide to e-mountain bikes. In part 1 we talked through all of the major components to give you a better idea of what they do. So if you haven't watched that already, I'd recommend you take a look. In this video we're going to take a look at setting up and caring for your new e-bike. From suspension setup to cleaning, lubrication and charging, we've got it all covered. So let's say you're lucky enough to have bought a new e-bike like this Cannondale Moterra Neo 2. The first thing to do before heading out onto the trails is to charge it up. And the best place to do that is indoors. This is because batteries need to be stored within a specific temperature range to optimise their life and performance, which is why it's really useful to have a removable battery so that you don't need to drag your muddy bike through the house. Aim for between 10 and 20 degrees Celsius and try to keep it out of direct sunlight. In the winter, to get the most out of your battery, try to store it in the house overnight before you ride. And if you do drive to the trails, you might want to think about transporting it inside a thermal blanket. Now what about the lifespan of the battery, I hear you ask? Well, it's difficult to say precisely, but the Bosch PowerTube 625 inside this Cannondale Moterra should have 60 to 70% of its life still left after around 500 cycles. And that's from fully charged to fully drained. So it could be as much as 15,000 kilometers. Now with a standard charger, charging the battery takes around 5 hours. But if you get the fast charger, this drops to under 4. And once you've fully charged your battery, reinstall it in the bike and refit the battery cover. Now it's time to start thinking about contact points, suspension and tyre pressures. Firstly, check your tyre pressures. Now I'd recommend using a standalone gauge and check them before every ride because they will slowly leak air. It's difficult to be specific about tyre pressures because it depends on your weight, your riding style, the tyre, the thickness of the casing and the terrain that you're riding. But we'd try starting around 25 psi in the front and 26 psi in the rear, and then raising and lowering the pressure from there. You want the tyre to deform a little to generate grip, but not so much that they squirm when you corner or pinch flat when you hit a bump. And it's also worth checking whether your bike comes with inner tubes. If it does, we'd consider taking them out as it will save weight and you'll have less chance of puncturing. But keep one of the inner tubes and strap it to your bike as a spare in case you get a flat. Now we can move on to the suspension. Now once again, there is no right or wrong suspension setup, but there are a few things to tick off to make sure you get in the right ballpark. Now to begin with, you need to set the sag. Now I should say before we start this, to do it properly, you really should be dressed in all the kit that you normally wear to go riding, and that includes a backpack full of water if that's what you carry. So starting at the rear, make sure that the damping is set to a minimum. Drop the saddle, sit on the bike and push the O-ring on the shock up the shaft to the seal. Put all your weight onto the saddle, lift your feet off the floor for a split second and then get off the bike. Now check the distance between the O-ring and the seal, and you want that to be around 30% of the total movement of the shock. So use your shock pump to add or expel air until you get to 30%. Now you can find out the shock stroke of your bike by looking up the tech info online. Now remember to remove your pump every time you check the sag. Now we can move on to the fork. So start by taking off any compression damping. Now you want to find something to lean against. So stand up into the position you normally would to descend with your head over the handlebars. Bounce up and down on the fork until it settles, and then you reach down and push the O-ring against the seal. Now try to get off the bike carefully without moving the fork. So you want the gap between the O-ring and the seal to be around 20% of the total fork travel. So just like with tyre pressures, you may want to deviate from these numbers as you get used to the bike, but they're a really good starting point. So now you'll want to tune the damping, and on most bikes the red dial does the rebound and the blue dial does the compression damping. So for the rebound damping, you want to make sure that when the fork or the shock hits a bump, it doesn't stay sucked down, but also so it doesn't buck when it returns. So on this Cannondale Mortera, it's a RockShox Lyric fork, and the rebound damping is down here at the base of the fork. That's really easy because there's a tortoise and a hare. Turn it towards the hare if you want the rebound to be faster, towards the tortoise if you want it to be slower. So now it's time to dial in your contact points. These are crucial for staying comfortable and in control. And we're going to start off with your saddle height. To do this, you want to set your saddle height so that your leg is completely straight when your heel is on the pedal at the furthest point from the saddle. Now it's important that you don't rock your hips to achieve this. So when viewed from behind, your hips want to be level as you pedal. Then when you put the ball of your foot on the pedal, your leg will have a slight bend in the knee at the lowest point. The saddle should also be level, and you want to try and move it forwards or backwards until the nose of the saddle is directly above the bottom bracket. Now this will help you keep enough weight over the front end while also maintaining good traction on the climbs. Now the handlebars can be rotated forward or back, and the stem raised or lowered to get a comfortable hand position. Now there's no right or wrong position for them, but you can use them to influence your weight distribution for cornering and descending. Moving your stem up or rotating your bar backwards will move the centre of gravity rearwards. Tilting the bar forwards or dropping the stem puts more of your weight over the front wheel. So don't be afraid to experiment to get a good balance. Now e-bikes come standard with an array of controls, so start by prioritising the brake levers. Start by moving the brake levers inboard so that your index finger rests against the hook of the lever for maximum leverage. Now angle them so that they're roughly in line with your arms. And we like to have quite a flat position, as then we can support our body through our arms and our shoulders rather than our wrists. With your brake lever set, now move your gear shifter within easy reach. And finally position your power control unit. Now most e-bikes have an intelligent mode that adjusts the power dynamically. On the Bosch system it's called EMTB mode, and it basically means you don't need to toggle between power levels while you're riding. This means you don't need to move it right next to the grip and compromise the position of your dropper post remote and your brake lever. So you've adjusted your suspension, set up your riding position and optimised your controls. Now it's time to ride. So let's pretend we're back from our riding, our battery is flat, the bike's filthy, and it's time to give it some love. First thing you're going to need to do, and I'm afraid it's not a glamorous task, is to clean your bike. So the sooner you can do it after your riding, the easier it will be, because the dirt and mud won't have had a chance to dry. Now if you've got a jet wash, it's going to be really tempting just to blast your e-bike clean. But that's absolutely the last thing you want to do, because using a jet wash can blast grease out of your bearings and potentially cause problems with the electrics. So we're just going to use a plain garden hose, and we're going to be careful with where we spray. But first we're going to protect the bike. Some brands like Specialized and Shimano say that you can leave the battery in situ when you wash the bike. But this Cannondale comes with the Bosch Performance Line CX motor, and Bosch recommends that you remove the battery before washing. Then replace the battery cover, and we're going to place a plastic bag over the control unit to help prevent water ingress. If you have a bike stand, clamp the bike and remove the wheels. Otherwise, just lean it up against the wall. Give it a quick rinse, then use brushes and a bucket of water to scrub off all the dirt. Get into all the nooks and crannies, then run the chain through a wet cloth. Rinse the mud with the hose on a low pressure setting until all the mud has gone. Always start at the top and work down. Now don't linger over the motor bearings or the electrics. Clean both wheels in the same way. Dry the frame and wheels with a microfiber cloth. Use another dry cloth to dry the chain. Refit the wheels. Dry off any electrical connections, control units or wiring. So to lube the chain, if you've got the battery installed, you can turn on the walk mode and run a bead of lube onto each link of the chain. Or if your bike isn't in the stand, you can take an Allen key, put it into the chainring bolts and pedal backwards as you apply the lube. Once you have a drop of oil on each link, spin the cranks back to let the lube work its way into the plates and rollers. Now take your rag again and wipe the excess off. Would recommend using a heavy-duty wet lube on your e-bike and reapplying it after every ride. And avoid using aerosols, as it's really easy to end up getting oil on your disc rotors. While you've got the bike in the stand, you can also take the opportunity to clean the seals on your shock and your suspension fork. Slide a zip tie carefully between the seal and the stanchions, and you can dribble a bit of fork lube down there to keep it nice and supple. Check your brake pads for wear, as they get a much harder life than on a regular bike. And that's it. So now you know how to set up and care for your new e-bike. In the final part of the series, we'll show you some riding tips to help you get the most out of it. Thanks for watching.